series showcases gender research tools and approaches that can be modeled and adapted for wider application in research projects and programs within IITA. So this is the third GLENS webinar we are having today, and presenting today is Dr. Titilayo Falade. She is a scientist at IITA. She contributes to food safety research in plant pathology, mycotoxin aflasafe. She is an expert in management, environmental consulting, and food safety research. She is a recipient of several awards. IITA Astounding Support Staff Award in 2011, the Lindsay Welsh Award in 2016, and 2021 Travel Award for a food safety professional in a country with a developing economy from the International Association for Food Protection. She has worked with the aflasafe theme for several years and has registered 17 aflatoxin biocontrol products globally. She works with stakeholders, including crop value chain players and other aflatoxin stakeholders, to address food safety challenges in a collaborative manner, including consideration to gender, climate change adaptation, and mitigation. She works at the grassroots, national, and regional levels, and she's a member of several professional associations, including the Gender Science Network here at IITA. Welcome, Dr. Titilayo Falade. Please, you can proceed to share your screen and present. The stage is yours now, Dr. Titi.
Thank you, Olamide, for that very kind introduction. And let me know when you can see my screen, please.
Yes, I can see your screen, and I'm sure everyone can.
Okay, thank you. So I'm really delighted to be speaking today about a subject I'm passionate about. And like the title says, I'm talking about aflatoxins, and now I'm saying, what does she know about aflatoxins? And first, let me give you some background to what aflatoxins are for yourself as well. So they're food hazards, they're a group of food hazards. They are secondary metabolites, meaning that they are not needed for the primary activities of production, sustenance, and so on. So it's likely that they are produced as a result of the need to adapt to harsh environmental conditions by toxigenic members of the Aspergillus section flavori. There are 4 main aflatoxins. There are many more, but the main ones are aflatoxins B1, B2, G1, and G2. B standing for blue and G for green, because that's the color of the fluorescence under UV light. The dominant one is aflatoxin B1, tends to be more than 70% about that in the mix of mycotoxins. And this group of aflatoxins are class 1 carcinogens, meaning that there's certainty that they cause cancer, specifically hepatocellular carcinoma, a very difficult to address form of liver cancer. Aflatoxins have been detected in multiple crops, so they're in very many staple crops. Normally, what I like to say is any organism, any food crop that can sustain the growth of the fungus is likely to be able to allow the accumulation of the toxin. So maize, groundnuts, chili, melon seeds, bush mango, which is known as ogbono, quite a number, sesame, many cereals and oil crops are susceptible to aflatoxins. And because of how hazardous they are very stringent measures in many countries regarding international trade of food crops containing aflatoxins. In the EU, for instance, less than 4 parts per billion is what is allowed for adult food. For children's food, it's less than 2 parts per billion of aflatoxins. Now, it's part per billion, not even parts per million, so that's 4 parts in a billion. And for other countries, less than 15 or less than 20 for most of the countries. And the thing about aflatoxins is they are not visible. They are not easily perceived. You can't perceive them. You can't smell, you can't taste, you can't see them. And if you look at those two kernels on the top left of the screen, you wouldn't see visible mold on the one on the left, but it contained more than 20 parts per billion of aflatoxin, that kernel alone. And you would see the fluorescence on that kernel under UV light. And that can be visible when the amount of toxin is really high. But look at the cobs below that photo, and you would see that the far right cob contains 179 parts per billion of aflatoxins, which is many times above what would be allowed into the EU at less than 4 parts per billion. And it doesn't have much visible mold. But the one just next to it appears quite moldy, much more moldy, and contains 2 parts per billion of aflatoxins. So you can't see the toxin, and it's possible that the fungus associated with the crop may be the non-toxin producing type. So just looking at kernels alone or cobs alone is not enough to talk about the level of mycotoxin contamination. Now, we're specifically focusing on maize because maize is a very important cereal, as at last year, more than 11 billion tons of maize was produced in Nigeria. It's used in human diet a lot. It's used for weaning foods given to children. Lactating mothers are often given grain maize cereal. People who have had operations and need to recover before they can take more solid food are given gruels, maize, or other foods. And it's used to masara, ugali, it's used in livestock feed, it's used in many feeds. Even corn on the cob is commonly eaten as well. So when maize is exposed to mycotoxigenic fungi, aflatoxigenic fungi, and humans have dietary exposure to that, there's a risk of aflatoxicosis, which is ingestion of aflatoxins that can then lead to a lot of illnesses and growth retardation. But secondary exposure can also come because of consumption of livestock or livestock products. So from dairy or from eggs, fish, which have been fed contaminated feed, or chickens, those kinds of things. So now my question was, what does she know about aflatoxins? I'm focusing, from that you know I'm focusing on women, and here we can see that the general roles of women in agriculture are quite diverse. Women are involved in production, on the field, in processing after harvesting, threshing, winnowing, and as biologically able to bear and produce children and breastfeed, women are also involved in production. And that is important because women are capable of transmitting aflatoxins to their unborn children. So if they eat contaminated food, that food can be transferred. The toxins can be transmitted through the umbilical cord to the child before the child is born. So many times exposure can even occur pre-birth, and then during breastfeeding, milk can be contaminated with aflatoxins, where the mother has been exposed to high levels of aflatoxins. The women are also most of the time involved in meal preparation. So the gender roles most of the time involves women producing. So, but many times our trainings are given on the creating awareness on aflatoxins. We give training on how to manage aflatoxins before harvest, so pre-harvest strategies such as using aflaseed to modulate the levels of toxigenic fungi on the field, and then post-harvest strategies like proper drying, sorting, storage in fixed bags, and the likes. So there are a lot of interventions that are required. Biological control is like our centerpiece, as we like to say. There are many other things that go along with that. But let me show you what our training programs look like. Sometimes, like in the bottom left, you would see no woman because the woman was the one, okay, yeah, I'm somewhere hidden there. Sometimes some photos, there's no woman, maybe the woman is the one holding the camera. But in many training meetings where we have requested that the partners invite trainees or training of trainer sessions, most of the time they are so male dominated. And I began to wonder how many women are getting this knowledge and how much do they know? So at one point, I was so excited to see other women in the photo that I took a group photo with them. You can see 4 of us in that set because we were so much in the minority most of the time. And this also happens when they're invited on farm or on station, like you see here, invited to IT. Most times I am the only woman in that meeting, or maybe with one admin colleague providing support. And the women are many times absent from this meeting. So what we decided to do was to assess the level of awareness among women. And we had a project to offer trainings in certain local governments and decided to use the opportunity to study the level of awareness among women. 2 local governments in Kano, Dokuwa and Kipia, and then 2 local governments in Kaduna, Lere and Sudan were selected. And those in bold and underlined are considered sensitized communities. And I'll tell you why we call them sensitized communities. Because of the several trainings that we've done prior to this time, we understood that a lot of people had received training in this location. So we wanted to see how much knowledge among the women was there with regards to those that were in the sensitized communities and those that were in non-sensitized communities. And the selections were based on a previous Ag Results Project report that spanned over 5 years. Because we were going to be working with human subjects, it was important that we got ethical clearance from the IITA Internal Review Board. And after we received comments on how to make adjustments and we received approval, then we gave informed consent forms to the women to indicate that they had agreed to participate in this study. We had to give consideration to social nuances. For instance, it was important that we got permission from the heads of the communities to have these women gather and have us speak with them. We needed to translate some of our documentation to Hausa, and then we had focus group discussions. We targeted 400 females from these 4 communities, so 100 per community, but we had 471 women that responded. So you would sense the desire to be part of this and to learn. And we had 5 men also attend the meeting. We welcomed them. So in Dokuwa, Kipia, Lere, and Kudan, you can see the age groups of women that were in attendance. The majority of them were below the age of 56 years. We had quite a young group. And many of them identified as wives or traders, secretaries, and members of cooperatives. And we could see that some were also mothers. Now, we asked quite a number of questions, what they knew about aflatoxins, how many of them had participated in trainings. There was a questionnaire with quite a number of questions that were asked them, but I was told I had 15 minutes, so permit me to not share too much detail about that now. But what we found is that there was quite a low level of awareness, especially in Kibia. And none of the women had heard about aflatoxins, none of them had heard about aflasif, and none of them in any of the 4 local government areas had heard about PICS bags. That's the Purdue Improved Crop Storage bags. In those that were sensitized and those were non-sensitized, it didn't really matter too much from what you can see. The level of awareness was low across the board. And this low level of awareness, about the 25% thereabouts, is similar to what was being seen in nationwide studies in Benin, in Togo, and in Ghana. but very dissimilar to what occurred in Kenya. And that's understandable because Kenya has suffered quite a lot of outbreaks of aflatoxicosis, and many lives have been impacted by that. So there's quite a high awareness about aflatoxins in Kenya. I was particularly very surprised that Larry had such a low level of awareness about aflatoxins at 4%, because there's been a lot of engagements in that community from the time that aflatoxin biocontrol with Aflasafe was being developed. And this is more than 10 years of sensitization and very low level of awareness among the women in the area. Now, some women, when asked about aflatoxins, mentioned that toxins is the cancer of maize, or it's a black mold. Exposure occurs when they eat foods that are contaminated, or exposure can occur on the farm or just prior to harvesting. And only one of those statements is accurate. And when asked about Aflasafe, none of the statements was accurate. Some refer to Aflasafe as the grains themselves that do not contain aflatoxins. I hear that quite often, so it wasn't too surprising. And then some also mentioned that Aflasafe is a chemical mixed with sorghum. And it's not a chemical, it's a biological active ingredient, but it's not something that is not uncommon to hear. There was no awareness at all about pigs, so they didn't even know what that was. And most of the people got to know about aflatoxins, Aflasafe from parents or from friends, and on rare occasions from trainings that were conducted by private sector groups to which they were invited. I think that occurred with only one community. And the impact of this is that there's a lot of inaction or inappropriate action. For instance, later on when we were doing training sessions, the women mentioned that they would, if they did separate food that have had low density, which tends to have high aflatoxins, they would incorporate it as milled food in the human diet or give to their livestock. So the exposure was not reducing because they did not have this knowledge. So from this, we see that women considered it very, very critical. A lot of women mentioned that it was important that they were made aware of food safety strategies. And Dobuwa was the only community where women had been invited to trainings, including on aflatoxin management, and they actually had quite high awareness on aflatoxin. Because part of the aflatoxin management strategies requires diversification of diets, ensuring that vaccinations are up to date, particularly hepatitis B vaccination. And we asked them whether they were, how much acceptance there was for hepatitis B vaccination in their communities. And in Kipia, whether for pregnant women or children, they were not accepting, they did not accept vaccinations. It was not something that was welcomed in their community, but there was quite high acceptance in Kudan for adult females and for children. None of the women mentioned that they had access to digital information. So although there's quite a lot of information out in the digital space on aflatoxin management, they are probably not accessing this information in those communities. And the women mentioned that the best way to probably increase their awareness, or what they would like to see, is to have awareness given in social groups, such as in their cooperatives or in religious gatherings, or through their parents and family and friends, word of mouth, as they normally get. And this just indicates that when we give trainings to these communities, it's important that gender responsive action is taken. And here we had a lot of women. We had the opportunity to gather these women and later on train them. I'm not presenting too much about that at this webinar. And we found that although she knows little about aflatoxins, when we asked what does she know about aflatoxins, we can see that she knows little. And this indicates that gender responsive training is very, very critical. And one story I would like to share with us is after these trainings were done and the donor went back for monitoring and evaluation, one of the women mentioned that after the training, she had opportunity to participate in some group cooking. So there was an event and a lot of women had to cook, and she noticed the improper practices of incorporating moldy or low density grains in their food. And she left that cooking station, went home to get her training materials, and came back to that meeting to train all those women, and they received the training from her. And that really warmed my heart and just made me feel really excited that this information is going beyond. These women have now become the training of trainers. And we do need to have these kinds of sessions more and more to include women. As part of the training sessions that we did later on after this focus group study, we did produce pictorial guides for the women, and we made sure that we stick cardboard, because you know how we wrap food in paper quite often. We wanted to be sure that this material was something that they would keep, and they did keep, as we could see from that woman who went back home to get those training materials to share the knowledge. And I'm happy to show that women are involved in all processes. There are women in the lab, there are women who go to the community leaders to advocate, there are women who are involved in the pre-test, the bottom left you would see, and then women involved in large-scale aggregation, and women at home. And women tend to be the ones who handle the smaller livestock. So this knowledge is critical for both males and females as members of the society to be aware of aflatoxins. And just the fact that they are potential conduits of this very dangerous toxin and are unaware is just goes to show that it's important for women to know this. So here I would like to end. I'd like to thank Ms. Tolu Owolabi, who helped to administer the questionnaires and do some of the translation to Hausa. She's part of the team, but deserves special mention. And the community leaders and heads of households that donated the study, and of course the women that participated in the focus group discussions. Also grateful to GIZ that funded the project through the project supporting the development of maize and cassava value chains in states in Nigeria. And with that, thank you for your attention, and I'm open to questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Titilayo. This is Millicent Liani. Maybe let me put on my video. Yes, so thank you very much for this very inspiring and informative presentation. And I would just like to open the floor to the participants. If anyone has a question or a comment, you can either put it on the chat or you can just use the icon to raise up your hand. So maybe a quick, I can see there's no question or comment yet in the chat box, but perhaps a question from my end to you. Maybe I just want to know, how can aflatoxins basically be removed from food when contaminated? And perhaps in doing so, are there any gender considerations or gender differences in the process of the removal of the aflatoxins? Thank you.
Well, removing the aflatoxins after they have entered the grains is really very difficult because the toxins are heat stable. The lactone ring that forms them. Millicent, are you speaking? I can see your mouth moving, but I don't hear any words. No?
I'm not speaking. So I've muted
Okay.
myself.
Okay. So there are heat tables, so roasting and boiling and those typical practices do not remove aflatoxins from food. There's a way of cooking that is typical to South America, which involves the use of boiling in lime, is known to detoxify a little bit. And fermenting food also to some extent would detoxify. But that's known for food that hasn't, we don't know the results from in vitro studies, but there's some speculations that with nixtamalization, which is what is done in South America, there could be a recombination in the gut and it could still be as toxic, but that is not clear yet. So removing it is not, the best way would be to avoid it getting into the food. So that's, with regards to whether there are gender differences with that, I wouldn't say so. The toxin itself is not one that would discriminate per se. So however we handle the food would not really be dependent on gender, in my view. Thank you. So I see a question from Steve Paul. What's the next steps in taking the study findings forward to inform the design of gender-responsive aflatoxin program in and outside of Nigeria? Any ideas? Yes, thanks, Steve, for this question. I think it was a very small study, a very short period, and there definitely needs to be more understanding as to how this can be improved. But one thing I see from literature and from our study is involving female extension agents in delivering this training and getting the community buy-in to be able to get women involved. You would notice I said there were 5 men that attended in one of the meetings. We had wanted 100 women in each of the local government, but from that community, we ended up having 97 women and 5 men in attendance. While that is welcome, we do not know whether that influenced the women's learning in any way, and we cannot measure that. So it would be good to see whether mixed training is important or is useful, whether it's needed to have the women trained in different fora. Some more understanding about the best way to reach these women is definitely needed, and I hope we can advance this form. I'm open to also to ideas from gender specialists like yourself, and I must say that Dr. Gundula also provided very good insights as to why it's critical to involve older women in these kinds of initiatives and the men in those communities, because sometimes the women don't get knowledge because the older women in the community pass down methods and insist that the younger women follow them, or the men in the community who are heads of households or community leaders, they do not have a buy-in, may not permit and allow an equal participation, sufficient participation of women. So these are some things that we can look at.
Okay, thank you very much, Titila. There's a question that's from Christiana, and she's asking if aflatoxin is dangerous to human if consumed.
Yes, it is. And chronic consumption of aflatoxin, so that's ingestion of small amounts over time, can lead to liver cancer, specifically hepatocellular carcinoma, which is very difficult to detect on time. So by the time it's detected, it's usually already in its advanced stages. Other disadvantages of aflatoxin consumption is the effect it has on the kidney. It's associated with reduced immune response. So someone who's had malaria or who suffers other ailments would succumb to aflatoxicosis more easily. And it's also associated with growth retardation in children, meaning that children do not develop as they should. So it is dangerous if consumed directly and also if transmitted from mother to child. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. And there's a question from Amina Peters, and perhaps I will ask Amina Peters just to ask that question. Just unmute and ask the question that you put on the chat.
I'm trying.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, I've succeeded in unmuting. I was asking, she talked about one of the issues she raised was on the low or non-access to digital information by these female farmers. So I was wondering, how do you hope to tackle that challenge? Thank you.
Thank you, Peters. You've given me a lot of power. I don't know if I'm able to tackle this myself, but I think as women get more empowered and as there's more information available to the communities, so the women and the men in the communities about why this is important and useful, I think there would be increased availability of these tools, and there may be an increased use of these technologies. Because as women form cooperative groups or begin to learn more, they would need some of these tools to advance in their own businesses and in their own activities. And so that is something that those communities and the women in those communities would be able to do to improve their access to digital tools. There's digital tools we're talking about: mobile phones, tablets, Android devices, or even simple telephones. So it would happen, I think, as development increases in these communities. I would like to see them increase their knowledge of aflatoxins and even increase their acceptance of vaccination, for instance. And I think as that is accepted, then they would also be accepting of other things. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And there's a question from Olamide, and she's asking, first she's congratulating you for the excellent presentation. And she is asking, in the course of your several years of research on aflatoxin and aflasef innovation, are there gender responsive policy aspects that can assist to increase awareness and adoption of aflasef by farmers in Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you, Olamide, for that question. I think it sort of builds on what Steve had also asked. Well, first, I think we need to understand it a bit more on how to approach this. But from what I'm learning, and as I get involved in this, I think getting women extension agents to be trained much more is critical, especially in communities where the interaction of males and females is a bit more controlled. In some women are at home and it is not permitted for the trainers. If it's a male, it's bashiga, you can't enter. If women are not allowed, men will not be allowed to reach women in those kind of communities. So extension agents, more training of extension agents, female extension agents is critical. Development of training materials that are useful and accepting for women. If you use light paper, for instance, this is just my thinking, because women are constantly in the kitchen or in communities where they need taking care of a child, and then the child can easily tear the paper. Having thicker materials may be useful. Another thing would be to meet women where they congregate. So if women are meeting more in social groups or religious groups at certain times, we could reach those members of such community leads and have them also be involved in the training and awareness creation so that women can be reached through those diverse platforms. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can't see any other questions in the chat. It's just comments about your great presentation. Dapa says a great presentation. Abdullahi says excellent presentation and lovely presentation, well done from Obi and others. So I think I'm from my end, I'm kind of curious just to follow up. I know this is mainly within the agricultural space. And I would say myself, having come from the public health space, now immersing myself into the gender research within the agricultural work. So I would just say that I would say for me, this is really a very kind of insightful, and in terms of even the research you are doing, it's very useful because we've had these studies around, okay, of course, the WHO research and even some of it in terms of the policies that are put in terms of how the use of the herbicides and even pesticides, they're actually harmful, especially to the women, depending on their life cycle they are within their years. And for those who are pregnant, for those who are lactating, and even those who are kindly in the reproductive stages of their life. So I would say for me, this is really a very great project. And I think it's something that we would say it's worth being done within the agricultural space. And yeah, looking at it and how the public health perspectives comes in terms of embedded into what we do in the agricultural space. And yeah, I would say I look forward to even collaborating with you on such learnings and even projects. So if there's any other question, there's a question from Davis. So I think I'll ask Davis to ask it. Davis, if you could just ask the question.
Thank you, Dr. Farade, for your great presentation. And my question is, you mentioned the fact that Lere community was one of the places where women were less aware of the aflatoxins, despite the efforts made to create awareness. My question was, were you able to establish the reason for that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. You see, a lot of the time, like I mentioned, I showed photos, a lot of the times it's the men who receive the training, and I don't think they pass it down at home. So I think that's what really has happened, because many times the training is given, and it's given to heads of households or leaders of farming communities. Most of the time, they are men. And from studies shown by other people, many times this information is not necessarily passed down at the home level. So that could be a plausible reason for this. Let's see if we don't know. Another thing that would be interesting to know is whether when women receive this training, it's passed down at the home level. That would also be interesting to see. And having this understanding, or having this as a possible reason for this information not reaching the women, then requires us to have strategies that are important, that are useful for reaching both groups. Because we want to make sure that the men are aware and the women are aware, because they both have very important roles to play in the society with regard to food security. So that would be my guess, and based on research by others and based on what we're seeing, that seems to be the reason. So the men in this meeting, when you hear about this from this training, please pass it down at home, and the women likewise. If I may, Millicent, can I ask which of the women in this meeting who are online now had not known about aflatoxins or aflasafe or fixed baths, just by a show of hands? Okay, I think it will be tough for you to get a low awareness in IITA, especially with this group. So it's critical that as this knowledge is reaching the women in this kind of informed group, it's also critical that the message is passed down in other groups where they interact. Thank you. Over from you.
Thank you. There's another question from Saweda, and she says, excellent presentation. And in her chat, she says, I wonder if targeting women might be a way to increase the adoption of aflasafe. Has that already been tested? So if you could respond to that, whether such an approach has been tested before. Thanks.
Thank you, Saweda. No, not to my knowledge, it has not been tested. I think this is probably the first gender themed study with aflasafe peaks that has been done. So that would be really a good thing to explore. So no, that has not been tested.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tatila. And maybe a quick one from me. You say that I think going forward, you need to work with more female agricultural extension officer. And of course, literature within the sub-Saharan Africa has shown 85% of agricultural extension officers are men, and it's just the 15 who are the women. So I wonder, with even that low numbers within the support system, how will that be possible? And just thinking around that, and I'll just share perhaps in the project that I'm also involved in that's taking a gender responsive approach in cassava seed system. You find, like in Tanzania, of course, the agricultural extension officers, the majority of them are the men. So I think the approach that, whatever the approach that I've opted to use, given the fewer number of extension officers, is kind of linking now these extension officers to work with the community development officers. And of course, majority of the community development officer, they're usually women. At least now fostering that linkages. And of course, in terms of providing all these learnings and awareness, and having these two teams working together in order to enhance issues around enhancing women participation, I think, in the work that we do, and even in terms of uptake of information and awareness. So maybe your thoughts on how that could actually be realized.
Yes, thank you, Millicent. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's a beautiful strategy to also explore, because the goal is to reach the women in the different groups, whether they are involved in processing or in production or at the home level, ensuring that they understand that a diverse diet is important, that they sort the grains and all of that. So it's important that they're reached, and the way to reach them can, if it doesn't have to be 100% extension officers, and probably should not be, then of course we should explore community development officers. We should explore groups where women are associated, or where they can have links that allow them to be reached. I think that's very, thank you for sharing that. That's very important. And I can talk more with you to understand how you're approaching them.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I think I'm seeing the last question. It's been directly messaged to me. I don't know who sent that. So the question is, the aflasafe is actually a pre-harvest approach to reduce aflatoxin. A farmer asked me, why not mixing aflasafe directly to the maize in the bags? What do you think about that? And the same person who shared this says, what are the other post-harvest management practices that can reduce aflatoxin from maize, just apart from what you presented. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those questions. Mixing aflatoxin directly at post-harvest stage will not be recommended for the following reasons. One, by that time, the toxin, if the crop was exposed to toxigenic fungi on the field, is already present in the grain. And combining aflatoxin with an already contaminated grain will not detoxify it. What you would be doing is to be introducing mold to the grain. And what it would also be doing is just exposing the grain to much higher levels of the biocontrol active ingredients than is necessary. So that is not a safe practice to follow. And secondly, aflatoxin also contains, it's a food dye, there's a polymer. You don't want to be introducing all of that into your crop. So it's just generally not recommended. That's not the intended use, and that's not the proper application for aflatoxin. So please do recommend to people as they ask that it's important that aflatoxin application is followed correctly. And even in the pre-harvest application of aflatoxin, there's a window of application, which is 2 to 3 weeks before the flowering of the crop, because it's at that stage that the population of the fungi on the field is about to increase. So when you apply aflatoxin at that time, you give advantage to the good or the non-toxin producers over the toxin producers on the field. So even with application on farm, there needs to be good practices followed, ensuring that proper moisture weeding is done, application of fertilizers is not done concurrently, and some other practices that are important. Other post-harvest strategies that can be followed for management of aflatoxins include sorting grains. So grains that are less dense, so those that are floating or those that are damaged when they have mold or they have cracks or they have insect damage, should be sorted or and removed. So damaged grains should be separated or sorted out from those that appear whole. So you tend to reduce the level of contamination by doing that. Also, proper drying and quick drying. So slow drying is not recommended. After you harvest the crop, it's important that it's dried as quickly as possible to reduce the risk of accumulation of the toxin in the crop. And then, of course, awareness is very important, and diversifying diets, so ensuring that we don't eat the same kind of food over and over again, so that there's no constant exposure to contaminated food. Ensuring that people have the immunity boosted, whether that's by taking fruits and vitamin C, and also ensuring that they have their vaccinations, particularly hepatitis B vaccination, because there's a synergistic interaction between aflatoxicosis and hepatitis B. So with those, when there's both, when an individual is exposed to aflatoxins and hepatitis B is endemic in this region of Africa, the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma is 4 times increased. So it's critical that people are also protected from that. So those are a few things, and some other things also in the training guide that you can find. So check on www.aflatoxin.com. There's a lot of information, a lot of resource material that can also help improve understanding. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that elaborate response. And I think just in relation to what you've just responded to, there's a question from Leo, and perhaps I'll ask Leo to just unmute and ask it. Leo Lamboni. Okay, the question says, do you think the peak bagging can reduce aflatoxin in maize? I don't understand what peaks bagging is, so maybe it will be interesting to also to know what the peaks, the acronym mean.
Okay. Sorry, that means my presentation was not very clear about that. But the PICS bags are hermetic storage bags, which means that the storage bags are cut out as much oxygen, a lot of oxygen from the stored grains. They are triple layer bags, Purdue improved crop storage bags. I think they used to be called cowpea storage bags. So there are 3 layers of bags where you fill the grains in the bags, get out all the air, seal it, and do the same for the second layer, and then seal the bag. Yes, I do believe that PICS bags can help to control and is a good management strategy for post-harvest control of aflatoxins, because insect damage is associated with high mycotoxin exposure risks. And what the PICS bags does is it reduces the risk of insect infestation. So you have less insect damage in your grains. And also because moisture is kept out, you're able to ensure that the grains are kept dry and free from insects for a longer period of time. I also particularly like PICS bags because it reduces the need for using agro pesticides post-harvest, because there tends to be very bad practices that are followed with grains mixed directly with insecticides or pesticides. And with PICS bags, you don't have that need because you're already protecting your grains from insects. So from a food safety perspective, yes, because of aflatoxins, and also yes, because of pesticide residue exposure risk reduction. Thank you. Thank you, Steve Cole. I see some links that you have shared. I'll just try and copy those. Yes, thank you. Olamide, Purdue improves crop storage bags.
Okay, thank you so much, Titilayo. I can't see any other questions or comments in the chat. So I'll just say very great thanks for actually agreeing to present in today's GLENS webinar. And I would like to hand it over to Olamide to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Millicent. Thank you. I think once again, I would like to echo all the positive comments in the chats and appreciate you, Dr. Titilayo, for your excellent presentation, awakening us to gender-responsive approaches that can be modeled to reach more women with safe innovations like AflaSafe and the PICS bag. Yeah, this is enlightening for me. And as well, involve more women and stakeholders in achieving safe food product consumption for all, for the benefits of all. Thank you so much. And we look forward to more engagement with you and wish you progress in your work. Yeah, I would also like to appreciate all the participants that has joined today and that has been joining the GLENS webinar since it started this year. And I would like to say that this will be our last GLENS webinar for 2022. And we'll also, in 2023, we have lined up, very good, enlightening, educating presentation for you. And we hope that you would always join our presentation and make inputs. Thank you all. I'm just saying thank you for your contributions and for participating in this webinar. And we look forward to better engagements next year. And on behalf of the Gender Science Network, same, and the GLENS webinar committee, I would like to say I wish you all a pleasant break, holiday, season's greetings to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.